These are some answers to the color and fatigue quiz that I asked you to take. If you're not clear on what's going on, this is usually something that I do in class. It's not really a quiz, it's not graded, but it's just a way to really quickly check your understanding of some of the concepts that we've been going over in class lately. So you should have already gone over that slide. It's just 8 questions on one particular hypothetical topic, and hopefully you've jotted down some answers. And so this is a way to sort of check your knowledge and get some feedback, at least in this format. So that way you can sort of understand, make sure that you understand some of the things that we've been going over lately. Okay, so if you haven't done so already, just write down some answers, take that quiz on your own, and pause this right now, and then we'll get back to it. If not, here are the answers. So the first question has to do with some research that you've heard saying artificial colors have something to do with fatigue. It's pretty vague, right? But sometimes like things you hear about are that way. So the question is, how should you now think about that proposal that your fatigue is caused by artificial colors? It's a weird question. Hopefully it made some sense to you. What I was kind of getting at is sort of how should you consider it, like mentally, how do you play with the idea that it might be true? And the answer is it's a hypothesis now. So it's a tentative idea. You shouldn't believe it completely, but you shouldn't necessarily just discard it. You know, if it's something that makes sense to you and you want to learn more about because you're feeling fatigued and tired and you're looking for maybe some answers, some things that, you know, can sort of change that. So it's a hypothesis. And again, as we've talked about, tolerating ambiguity is really important. And so you can kind of consider it as maybe true without saying that it definitely is true until you get more information. And that's what the next few questions are about. So you hear about a study in question 2 that says that people who eat more artificial colors report being tired. What kind of study is this likely to be? It's probably a correlation. How can you tell? Because if you read that sentence, people who eat more artificial colors report being tired, it really doesn't sound like they did any manipulation, that they didn't do anything on their own. So in other words, they didn't have people randomly assigned to an artificial color group versus a control group. It just sounds like they went out and asked people questions about the kinds of foods they eat and whether or not they feel tired. And that's definitely a correlational study. This is a weird question, and we haven't really discussed this yet, so hopefully you thought it through a little bit. If artificial colors cause fatigue, does that mean there has to be a correlation? And the answer is yes. Again, we didn't discuss this in class, but causation implies correlation. In other words, if artificial colors cause fatigue, then they have to correlate with each other. So a correlation must be present if one causes the other. If that kind of tripped you up a little bit, it's because the next question is really what we're usually used to dealing with. This one was a little tricky and kind of hard, but hopefully if you thought it through really well, it might have occurred to you that, yeah, okay, so there needs to be a correlation between the two if we can assume it's true that one causes the other. The problem is we can't really usually assume that. On the next question, this is what we're usually used to seeing, the other way around. If there's a correlation, does that mean there's causation? And the answer there is no. So correlation doesn't imply causation. Just because two things correlate, you don't know whether one causes the other. However, what the last question was asking is, if one causes the other, would we see a correlation? And the answer is yeah. Remember that if two things correlate, one of the possible explanations is artificial colors cause fatigue. And as it says there could be other possible explanations for that correlation, like other aspects of that person's diet. If you have the kind of lifestyle where you eat a lot of junk food, don't eat really well, you eat a lot of things with artificial colors, you might not have the best sleeping habits, so it could be unrelated. But if one causes the other, they would definitely have to correlate. Should you be aware of wishful thinking? So by now you've gotten the sense that anytime we talk about these things, these are concepts that I'm going to bring up. Again, because what we want to be true really interferes with how much we assess whether something is true or not. But of course, the two have nothing to do with each other. But that's really, really hard for us to wrap our heads around. The reason that I'd be worried about wishful thinking in this case is, man, it would be awesome if I was feeling really tired all the time, if there was a relatively simple answer. In other words, I could make a quick, easy, relatively easy change to my diet. Then I would feel a lot better. I would have a lot more energy and feel more awake. But that's, by itself, that's wishful thinking. So it could be true, but I have to be careful about, am I more likely to believe that it's true just because I really want it to be? I want a simple answer. And also I want that feeling of, I understand this. I can wrap my head around it. So I know answers. We all want to be able to say that and not left in kind of this gray area where we're not sure what's true or not. That being the case, is there a possibility of confirmation bias here? Sure, and what do you do about that? Well, there's a couple of things. For one thing, make sure I'm not only looking for research that finds a connection between the two. Even if there is a research study on the topic, are there other ones out there that might say otherwise, might say there is no connection between artificial colors and behavior states or how I feel or fatigue? Research that there's no evidence of artificial colors having any effect on the brain. And that stuff is out there. So we wouldn't want to ignore that just because it doesn't kind of go along with this story that we're trying to build. Other things that we can do is think about with ourselves alternatives. So yeah, I've been eating a lot of artificial colors lately, and yeah, I feel tired, but are there times I feel tired when my diet was pretty good? I can probably come up with those instances as well. Are there times that I've eaten a lot of artificial colors or other weird things in my diet and felt awake anyway? So that's a little bit weaker evidence, right? Because it's based on my own personal memory of what's been going on. Have I been feeling tired lately, and what's my diet been? But nevertheless, I would, if I'm going to think about times where I felt really tired and my diet hasn't been so good and I've been eating a lot of junk food and artificial colors, what about other situations? Do I just feel tired constantly? In which case, maybe it has nothing to do with diet, and that'd be some evidence sort of against what I want to be true. So now we're talking about a study where some people are given diets high in colors, some people are given diets low in colors, and the first group reports that they feel more fatigued than the second. So a couple of definitional things. Independent and dependent variable. So the independent variable, again, is what we propose to be the cause. Since we're manipulating it in this case, it's a little bit easy to understand. So we assign people to groups with different diets. So they eat different diets. And again, if the study is well conducted, then we put controls in place so that those are the only differences between the two groups. So one group gets a diet high in colors, the other gets a diet low in colors, and that's the independent variable. That's the manipulation, that's what we believe is the cause. The dependent variable then is what we're measuring, which is fatigue. Is that more or less valuable than a correlational study? Well, it's definitely more valuable because we randomly assign people to groups. And so that means, again, if we did it right, there are no alternative explanations. There are no lurking variables. It's nothing to do with the kind of person who eats more artificial colors. It's nothing to do with other things going on in their lives. We assign people to groups, so we've got some people who eat healthy diets and some people who don't, some people who sleep well and others who don't, and then we're just asking them about their fatigue levels. So if it turns out, as the answer says, that the first group that eats diets high in artificial colors reports more fatigue than the second, the only explanation is that it's the artificial colors in the diet. Unlike a correlation where just because two things go together and you have a strong correlation, high R value, doesn't necessarily mean that we know what the cause is. Here we know it for sure because we manipulated it and held everything else constant. What this last slide really gets at is some of the arguments that I see once in a while in people's homeworks or in all of our thinking that doesn't necessarily disprove this connection that we're talking about, this hypothetical argument that eating food with a lot of artificial colors is one reason I feel so fatigued all the time. So you could say, I definitely don't think that's true. It's other stuff. Maybe I'm drinking a lot of coffee or, using Adderall. Maybe I haven't been sleeping lately, other kinds of things. Now, all of those could be true, and realistically, they're probably more reasonable than artificial colors if we're thinking about that. But these things aren't mutually exclusive. In other words, just because one thing is true doesn't mean these other things aren't true. So saying, really, it's a lack of sleep. Really, it's that I've been using like different kinds of stimulant drugs, like drinking a lot of coffee, I've been staying up late, that kind of thing, doesn't disprove that colors might play a role as well, that diet might matter. Again, it's reasonable to think that really that's what's going on. So it's, usually when people talk about how tired they are, they'll try and say that they have some kind of like sleep disorder or something like that, when really they're just not getting enough sleep. But in and of itself, it doesn't rule out diet to say these other things are true. I bring that up because oftentimes when people talk about correlations, they'll say this correlation can't possibly be true because other things are, more of a factor. That might be true, but that doesn't disprove that something in a correlation might be a cause as well. The second question, and this seems to be a little bit cut off, has to do with thinking about friends of yours, and since they have the same diet as you, but they seem to have more energy, camping the coloring. Well, that's true, but we just heard about a large controlled study that sort of said, yeah, it's true, there's a relationship there. So just thinking about your friends, well, that's just anecdotal evidence. Also, it's important to keep in mind that, maybe they, just because they seem like they have it together and seem like they're pretty well rested and have a lot of energy, doesn't mean they're not thinking the same thing and they don't feel fatigued either. So that's one of many reasons that you have to be a little bit concerned about anecdotal evidence relative to large studies that have hundreds, maybe thousands of people in them. Okay, so that's everything with this colors and fatigue quiz. If you have any questions, again, keep them in mind, and when I get back, we can talk about it. All right, take care.